North Dakota State is headed to FBS and the Mountain West. A historic day for the North Dakota State Bison as the football team heads to the Mountain West. Hey, welcome back to the Big Mountain. JY here. I have Sam Herder with me to talk about this huge news for not just North Dakota State, but for the Mountain West and really all of FCS. We're going to get into all of that. But Sam, hey, welcome back on to the Big Mountain.
Yeah, it's always good to be back on. Thank you for having me. It's been a pretty hectic last handful of days. Bobby Houck stepping down in USD, Travis Johansson, he steps down. And then, why not just throw one more big breaking news, probably the biggest off the field breaking news item in the FCS for, maybe ever, losing your top brand to the FBS and the Mountain West. And so, yeah, it's been a busy time. And yeah, this NDSU to the Mountain West news is something that folks have been waiting for a long time. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on your show, but I want to give you kudos because you have been on top of this as far as reporting that, things are still in motion, even though, some other outlets might have said, it seems a little quiet out there, but you've always maintained that things are in motion. And now, here we go. The Bison are heading to the Mountain West.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate that. And I know, Bison fans, as you said, they have been kind of up and down, rumor this and rumor that for many, many years. We can talk about that. But, facts being where they are, we're recording this on a Sunday. So the news hasn't officially dropped yet, but we have reporting from Ross Dellinger. Just before we recorded this, we have new reporting from Pete Thamel with ESPN. And typically when he's reporting something, it's basically, kind of a done deal. He's saying an announcement to come on Monday. And things really got hot and heavy there on Friday. Ross, I believe, was the first person to put something out, at least that I saw. Everybody and their brother then started putting things out that discussions were ongoing and very, very close, kind of in the final stages of negotiation. So I just want to get your take kind of when you saw that news on Friday, how surprised were you? And then at the same time, can you just speak to just the history of these rumors that Bison fans have had to kind of deal with now for quite a long time? And I can understand Bison fans being skeptical of different reports from all over the place. So can you just speak to what your feelings were when you heard that on Friday and kind of the history of how things have gone?
Yeah, I think honestly, my first reaction when I saw it pop up, because I have tweet alerts up for Ross Dellinger because he's always tweeting or breaking really good news. I honestly think my first reaction was I laughed just because on my podcast, we just got done recording an emergency episode because of the Travis Johansson news. And then we're like, well, we'll see you next week. Nothing else is going to happen. Right. And then an hour later, the NDSU news break. So honestly, I think my first reaction was I kind of laughed and be like, really? Like Friday night news dump? I guess here we go. But my second reaction, honestly, was about time. And I'm guessing there are many people across the FCS and many people across the Bison fan base and probably a lot of people within the NDSU administrative and coaching staff that also had the same reaction of, it's about time, because you can probably go back to 2015, if not maybe a little bit earlier, about the first, NDSU needs to go FBS. It's time for them to move up. And it's been 10 years of kind of slowly more and more Bison fans getting on board, going from, we like being the big fish in the small pond. We love national championships. That's kind of what NDSU fans were saying compared to bowl games. But then the more NDSU won, the more the FBS want was starting to increase. And there really wasn't, there was the one Brett McMurphy tweets, out there, saying that, if Northern Illinois doesn't join the Mountain West, it could be NDSU. But when it came to like all the other national accounts, like there really wasn't any reporting saying like, yeah, things are going to happen. And so for Bison fans, they were just hanging on to any little piece of breadcrumb they can. And they were like analyzing everything Matt Larson said and said, oh, he said this in the future tense, not the past tense. Does that mean they're about to join? Like any little thing, because there's nothing really out there besides some smoke and rumors. And especially for the last 3 years, it was like, oh, it could be happening. The Pac-12, is going to survive, and they're going to take, teams from the Mountain West. And so that opens a door for, NDSU and others to join the Mountain West. And then, that didn't happen initially. Now, obviously it is, but it just seemed like every time there was an open door for NDSU to possibly go to the FBS, it got slammed shut. And so I know, like, when you were doing your reporting, some Bison fans pushed back on you. And I think that was probably not a personal thing, but more of just Bison fans saying like, we've been through this before and nothing ever happens. So until it actually happens, then we'll believe it. And so you can kind of understand their mindset of why they were so, like you said, skeptical of, any piece of rumor or gossip out there about NDSU potentially going to the FBS.
Oh, no doubt. And that's any school, for any change, especially that it's kind of taken this long in some people's eyes. They become very skeptical about that. So just a couple of things. The reporting right now is that it's going to be happening here for this football season, 2026, football only member. And I can get that. And I also was a little bit surprised. I had heard most recently that 27 was the most likely time frame for them. Are you surprised that it's going to be this fall? I mean, knowing that, once they're announced, I think at the FCS level, they're no longer to participate in the playoffs, which of course nobody really wants to have to deal with that. And they're also going to have a period here as they transition to FBS. So is the timing of 2026 kind of surprising to you, or did you always expect it to happen fairly quickly once they kind of, made that decision?
No, it was definitely a surprise, because usually you don't see it being this quick of a turnaround, where usually there is, if NDSU were going to go to the Mountain West, the soonest most people thought was 2027, because that's the most usual route. You have a transition year where you're still technically an FCS member, but you're playoff ineligible, and then you join, your new FBS conference. That's what Delaware did, Missouri State, all of those teams, except for James Madison. They were able to make the jump right away into the Sun Belt without kind of having, that FCS. You're FCS, but you're not really an FCS. You're moving up. They didn't have to do that year. That was obviously this was for NDSU a much shorter turnaround, right? In, February, to turn things around and get your schedule ready for the 2026 season. So definitely a surprise there. Frankly, I prefer it this way, because now as an FCS media member, I don't have to deal with, NDSU is still in the FCS, but they're playoff ineligible. They're 8-0 right now, but they can't be ranked in the top 25 because they're playoff ineligible. Who's better, Montana State or NDSU? We don't know. Well, now we don't have to deal with that, because, NDSU is, they're moving up right away. We won't have to deal with, them potentially being the best team in the FCS, but we don't know that for sure, because they won't be, able to participate in the playoffs.
Yeah. And, for those that aren't aware, I think most probably are, but these are the rules that the NCAA has, right? This isn't the Mountain West or North Dakota State saying this timeline. This is the kind of the known rules of NCAA, which kind of, to your point, forces them into this timeline. And I'm with you. I love it because of everything that you just said. And if you're a Bison fan, you're like, hey, if we're going, if we sign on the dotted line today, I want to be playing FBS tomorrow. Which is, it kind of sounds like, where we're headed here. And in terms of schedules, and you mentioned that a little bit, I know I have a lot of people asking me about Mountain West schedules. The Mountain West has already put out for football, which teams in conference a school is going to be playing at home and a school is going to be playing away. Of course, they're going to have to redo that and kind of reschedule some things. And we saw the same type of situation happen with GCU. That was a really quick turnaround for basketball when they were announced, and kind of they had to redo the basketball schedules. So the Mountain West is kind of been through this before, maybe not at the football level. Very flexible. They'll get it done. I don't have answers as to what that looks like. Of course, that's something we'll stay on, and when we can get information out there, we will. But I love that it's a 10 football team league now. I think that's extremely important. I hope there's another one or two to come. But really excited for the Bison. And I have to ask you, kind of with this, a lot of people have always said to us, and probably to you, that they always viewed the two Montana schools tied together, North Dakota State and South Dakota State tied together, or North Dakota State and North Dakota tied together. That has changed over the years. I would just love your opinions on kind of this one school within that region. A very strong FCS region. What are your thoughts of kind of plucking this one school out, leaving the Jackrabbits and the other schools there, at least for now in FCS? Are you seeing this mainly as a positive, or give me some color on that?
Yeah, I think like the Montana schools are definitely tied together, they're under the same, whatever they call it, the Board of Regents, or, whatever they call it in the state. But, NDSU is not tied to UND. They're certainly not tied to South Dakota State. I mean, even 2 weeks ago, I was saying, NDSU either won't make this jump without South Dakota State or can't make this jump without South Dakota State. And I always kind of just laughed at that. I'm like, I don't know why people think that, because
Right.
yeah, I think on one hand, you could say like NDSU would love to keep the rival together with South Dakota State as far as football. Now, like NDSU other sports, they're going to stay in the Summit League, which is why a football only move, is perfect, because if Montana State and Montana made a football only move to the Mountain West, they would still have to move their other sports out of the Big Sky. NDSU doesn't have to worry about that. They just keep their sports in the Summit League. They'll still keep on playing the Jacks and the Yotes and the Fighting Hawks. But football wise, like on one hand, like I said, maybe they would like it to keep the Dakota Marker game and that rivalry going. On the other hand, though, like why would you not want to be the only FBS team in the Dakotas and the Montanas? Because that's a recruiting pitch. And so I always push back on they had to go together, because that's not the case, or NDSU won't go without South Dakota State. That's just not the case. I mean, the Bison are glad to, quote unquote, leave everyone else behind it and be that premier team as far as like what level you're at, because that's a recruiting pitch. If they're battling South Dakota State for a recruit, what's NDSU's recruiting pitch? Do you want to play at a higher level? Well, then come here. So I think NDSU making this move alone, especially because it's football only, so you don't have to worry about travel partners and all that. I think it certainly makes sense for the Bison to make this jump alone. And from an FCS perspective, I'm always kind of one that says there's pros and cons with everything. And the cons for the FCS are pretty obvious when you lose such a brand name like this and the notoriety that NDSU brought to the FCS, not only with their success on the field, but sending guys to the NFL and, just having that brand recognition with NDSU. And like the subdivision obviously gets weaker when you lose a team like NDSU. But in my opinion, I think the pros outweigh the cons. You can argue, either way on that. But, I think the pros of this is it opens, more storylines and it more fresh storylines, and it opens the window for other teams to make deep playoff runs. And we saw it this year in the playoffs. And it was kind of funny after NDSU lost in the second round, which was shocking. The first time the Bison haven't made at least the quarterfinals since 2010. Me and my podcast co-host were kind of talking about like, this could be a glimpse into the future, because we've always wondered, what would the FCS playoffs look like without NDSU? That'd be kind of weird, right? Like how would that look? And we saw in the quarterfinals and the semifinals and beyond that it was probably the most intriguing FCS playoffs in years. And the television ratings were actually the best in quite some time. And so it kind of gave us a glimpse of like the FCS playoffs aren't going to collapse if NDSU isn't in it. The bar kind of gets lowered a little bit. At the same time, I think even if NDSU was in the FCS in 26, like I still think Montana State is the favorite, but still, you lose some a really high quality team in NDSU that hurts the level of play, but you maybe make up for that when there's new storylines and new intrigue and other fan bases kind of being involved in the FCS national title picture, conversation. Whereas before it was just like, well, it's going to be NDSU versus Montana State or South Dakota State in the title game, every year. And NDSU is probably going to win it every other year. And if you're a SoCon fan or a UAC fan, like that's just not fun for you. Now, Montana State and South Dakota State, Montana, like those teams are usually going to be at the top still, but it at least opens the door for, a Rhode Island or a Tarleton State or, a UND or a UC Davis. It makes room for another team to now take NDSU's spot. And I think overall, that's a pro for the FCS, and it makes things a lot more intriguing.
I totally agree with you. And I'll just give a shout out to the FCS championship game in Nashville. The number of people in attendance. Obviously, I don't know what the percentage was, but the Montana State fans certainly showed up to Nashville. But what a great environment that was in that stadium. You mentioned the rankings. I'm excited for FCS in the future as well. We covered it more this year than we have covered it in the past, partially because we're following some of these FCS schools that I think, had a chance at being moved into the Mountain West. But a lot of excitement there in FCS. I think it, as you mentioned, it breeds more possibilities, probably more excitement, because to your point, there's more fan bases probably interested in, hey, we're going to make the semis, or we're going to make the finals, or whatever the case may be there. Shifting gears here a little bit, I want to talk about the financials here at North Dakota State, maybe some of the facility stuff. We have a lot of Mountain West fans that watch this pod, so I'm sure we got plenty of Bison fans, but want to kind of educate our Mountain West fan base here as well. Before we get into the financials and the facilities, I want to ask you about the transition of presidents here, because this came up on our pod over the past month or so. Of course, they're having an outgoing president here. It's happening like almost today. I don't remember the exact date. Maybe you have it, but it's happening very, very soon. An incoming president is. I've made the comment that I didn't think that really mattered a whole lot. Because I think, the board of whatever they are, regents or trustees or whatever they have there, the AD, probably the new president has already been, brought into these discussions and things. Do you think the president changing over really had any play here on this, or it was just kind of, hey, this is the time and we got to go?
Yeah, I think it maybe wasn't ideal timing for the president to be leaving, and I believe he's heading to Iowa State because it probably just created a bit more stress on like making sure NDSU is able to push this across the finish line. But from what I've heard over the years, and I can't even remember how I believe David Cook is the president's name. He wasn't at NDSU for very long, at least a few years. But from what I've heard, like there was certainly a lot of people within the NDSU athletic department administration that wanted to go FBS. There was others within the administration that wanted to, but didn't want to be too risky, about to wanted to make sure that they made the right move at the right time. But I had heard that, the president also wanted to make the move, that, the president's office had that support. I remember hearing that in Frisco, not this last season, but the season before that. Like the NDSU, like president, like legacy wise, like he wants to push NDSU into the FBS. And that's kind of contrary to, some other reporting as well. Casey Smurthwaite, who has great intel and, he writes for Hero Sports and reported this, that maybe there was a little bit of disconnect. That's what he heard. So, maybe it was just bad intel from other people that might be in the know. But I think, NDSU's president, I would guess, wanted to, and I don't know how much of a legacy you can have if you're only there for a few years, but maybe he wanted his legacy to be like, hey, I was a part of that, helping NDSU cross that finish line, because there was donor pressure. There was fan pressure. There's definitely fan fatigue in the FCS. And so there was the more NDSU won, the more NDSU fans wanted to leave the FCS and go to the FBS. And there were some high level boosters that said, like, if someone's donating $1 million to NDSU, that's a lot of money. But they might say, like, if I donated $200,000 instead of $1 million, you guys are still going to win the FCS championship, right? Like you don't need this money. So like that money is going to dry up if you're sticking around the FCS. Now in the FBS, I would imagine donations are going to increase for NDSU. They're going to the FBS. And so I really think, timing wise, I don't know if this was specifically tied to, the president leaving, but maybe it picked up that urgency a little bit. And if anything, you reported on the Mountain West TV deal, like kind of convenient timing, right? Where things all of a sudden move very quickly after the TV deal. So it's probably more of that than the president leaving. But I do know he did have interest in going FBS. So maybe, I have 3 weeks left at NDSU. I'm going to really go all in on making sure this happens.
That's a great point with the legacy part. Whether that's a piece of it or not, absolutely part of his legacy. It's something that has been talked about for quite some time. So yeah, I think we're probably overall kind of in agreement on that, but definitely a legacy point for him. And you mentioned, donor pressure, and, I want to kind of get into the financials next. Pete Thamel of ESPN reported here today on Sunday that $12 million will be paid to the league. The reporting, I think, on Friday, Ross or some others had mentioned like 8 figures, thinking around 10 million. So I was a little surprised to see the 12 million number come out. Again, reporting from Thamel. We don't have agreements or anything on that. That's on top of the $5 million that they have to pay to the NCAA as that part of the transition agreement or phase to go from FCS to FBS. So we're talking $17 million here just to make this move, and that's outside of NIL and facilities and anything like this. So I want to hear from you kind of about the finances here of North Dakota State. I have been told by many people that, and it gets back to what you said, a little bit of a fatigue maybe from the donors right now before the move, but hey, when they make the move, the donors are there, the money is ready, they will push the Bison to the top of the peak of the Mountain West here. That's what I have been hearing. Do you think overall that the financial situation with the donors, oil money or whatever it may be, is going to be there to really like push this football team forward as they switch to FBS?
Yeah, I don't think money is an issue really. Now they're going to have to rely on those donors, and yeah, I mean, they'll get some pay games as well, and they'll get some CFP distribution. I'd be interested to see what NDSU, since it's football only, like what they get from the Mountain West as far as TV partner distribution and all that. But and I think I've said it before on your show that NDSU is one of the lowest allocated schools in the FCS. They barely get any money from student fees. They barely get any money from the state. All of the money that they put in, not all, most of the money they put into athletics, they have to raise themselves, whether it's through donations, ticket sales, merchandise, local TV partnerships. NDSU, the last report said, I'm pulling it up now on Hero Sports, NDSU gets $1.3 million from student fees. James Madison gets like what, $60 million from student fees, like some huge number like that. And so NDSU fans are wildly passionate, but it takes money obviously to compete. And so this isn't just like a one-time thing, for NDSU fans that they have to support. They have to continually year over year donate a lot of money, contribute a lot of money, buy merchandise, buy season tickets, all of that, because NDSU, although it is football only, they are going to have to up their game as far as their football budget and NIL and how much they're paying their coaches and how much they're paying their assistant coaches. And so all that money needs to elevate, because NDSU frankly isn't going to be happy if they finish third place every year in the Mountain West. Like they want to go there and win the Mountain West, and that's going to take some money. And this being football only helps. If this was all sports, I'd be a bit more, I don't know. That's going to really stretch NDSU thin, as far as their budget, if it was all sports. But football only is just a dream scenario for them, because they can save on all those travel costs with their Olympic sports just staying in the Summit League.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, right now the NIU model, as I'm going to call it, because we are a Mountain West pod and we saw what they did. Of course, they had to switch conferences for both their football and their Olympic sports. They didn't have kind of the benefit that the Bison have here, being able to stay in the Summit. But I think, we talked about this a lot. We had AD Frazier on several times there with NIU. I think we're going to see a lot more of this type of situation where, football is able to go and compete maybe at a more national level. I hesitate to say higher level, but more national level. And your Olympic sports are able to be a little bit more regionalized. And, I think these agreements, we mentioned that $12 million to the league. There's a lot of ins and outs when it comes to these agreements. Entrance fee here, but the Mountain West is going to give this. And so I just want to be a little cautious on, any of that financial stuff until we can see the full agreement. Because you mentioned TV deal, and maybe that's where I would like to go next. The Bison are going to be playing on, Fox Sports, CBSSN, the CW now with the Mountain West. And so they already have a great fan base. And anybody that follows college football should know, I'm sure they know of the Bison. But that exposure aspect now is going to be a whole different level from kind of what they've been used to. What do you think that brings to this university?
Yeah, I think that is a big reason why, and there's a multitude of reasons on why schools, move up to the FBS, but, exposure is a big part of that. And NDSU already got, a ton of exposure, as it was just, if they're in the quarterfinals, semifinals, and the national championship game, all combined, you're probably talking, I don't know, 4-ish million, viewers, if not a bit more, between all three of those games. So they were already getting, a whole lot of exposure as it was. But, they right or wrong, they still fought that FCS label. And so now when you join the FBS, that just kind of moves your football program forward a little bit. It moves your university forward a little bit. You get a bit more engagement when it comes to fans. And like it's much different compared to, like, if Montana State and Montana made the move to the Mountain West, I do think half of that fan base would push back on the administration, saying, no, we don't like this. Like, we like the FCS playoffs. You don't really see that with NDSU. I'm sure there's some out there that don't like it, but for the most part, NDSU fans were saying, all of us are ready for this from their perspective. So I do think, increased exposure, NDSU had a hard time selling out games. I would imagine all of their home games are going to be sellouts now. And so I do think it's a great ad for the Mountain West. I think it's great for NDSU just to be able to get more of that exposure. And it'll be interesting because I think NDSU can go into the Mountain West and compete right away. Now the 2026 team, does have a lot of question marks, across its roster, probably more so compared to other teams. But, overall, they're in a situation where they're going to be able to compete right away. Some people have already said NDSU is going to be in the CFP within 3 years. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're probably going to have to schedule smart in the non-conference, because I don't know if the Mountain West Conference winner has a direct path to the CFP. It's, probably either, the Pac-12 or the American, most likely. But I do expect NDSU to be among the best teams in the G6. And there's kind of that carrot out there to chase now of, hey, if you're good enough, you can play in the national, tournament. And if not, I know there's the FCS playoffs versus bowl games debate and which one's better, but I think for NDSU fans, they would trade in FCS playoffs for bowl games right now, because they've been there, done that. And plus those bowl games, going back to your question, those bowl games get great exposure as well, TV wise.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The CFP, a whole nother topic we could talk about. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I appreciate your thoughts on that. And yeah, I kind of want to maybe switch gears here quickly and talk about facilities. And again, maybe educating. Of course, Bison fans know what the Fargo Dome is, and the goods and the bads and whatnot. But can you maybe educate the Mountain West fans that have not been to Fargo and have not been to this university? What can they expect from that home field there with the Bison? And it's an interesting, I guess, scenario that is it the city owns, I guess, that facility, and so there's kind of a back and forth on what kind of upgrades they can do, because I believe the taxpayers would have to approve that. So can you give us kind of an overall feel about where they're at with the football facilities there?
Yeah, they have a pretty new, it was open within the last few years, a new practice facility, I believe $50 to $55 million practice facility for NDSU. And that was all privately raised. And so again, going back to the money part, they have donors that can step up, right? Like they didn't rely on, taxpayers or, the school or the state to pay for that. So very nice facility there, pretty close to the Fargo Dome. The Fargo Dome itself, when it's packed, it's a very unique environment. It's incredibly loud in there. It seats about 18,700, somewhere around there. When they are able to sell out, it's incredibly loud. It's an older building, and yeah, you're right. The building is, I believe, on NDSU's campus, but the building is owned by the city of Fargo. And so if there is any major upgrades, that's probably going to come, with the price tag as far as, increased taxes or whatever it is on the Fargo population there. And they've tried a couple of different times, and that's been voted down. And so the Fargo Dome is a cool environment. They've upgraded where they can as far as the locker room, and the coaches' offices are really nice. But as far as like the stadium and the concourse and the seats themselves, like NDSU isn't in much control on how that looks. So it is a dated building, but I think it's unique. It's, maybe already going to be among, the top home field advantages in the Mountain West, again, when it is sold out, which I expect it to be. As far as travel wise, there's a decent sized airport right by the campus. And so this isn't like, if you're going to go to South Dakota State for a game, you have to fly into Sioux Falls and then drive to Brookings. That's not the case with NDSU. You can fly in right there. They have multiple gates. It's a decent sized regional airport. So it's not like you have to fly into Minneapolis and drive 3.5 hours if you're a football team. Like travel wise, it's pretty friendly for visiting football teams. So that's another aspect too that I think is maybe underrated from a fan perspective, but from a school perspective, it's like, well, how are we going to get there? Oh, you have an airport right there and it's easy to fly into. Perfect. We don't mind doing that instead of having to drive 3 hours, to get to your home stadium.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up that part about the airport. I'm not sure how many people in the Mountain West are aware of that, but not much of a drive once you get into Fargo there, like you would have in some other institutions. And you mentioned the fan base. I think with this news that's been hitting, I see about 50% that say, it's about time almost, like 49 saying, yeah, we're ready. And maybe, I see a very few that just say, I'm not lukewarm, they're not like against it. I haven't seen anybody come out and, be super against this, but maybe just they're happy in FCS. You kind of mentioned that with the Montanas and stuff. Well, I can tell you as a Mountain West fan, I am ecstatic that the Bison will be playing Mountain West football, what appears to be in 2026. And Sam, hey, I appreciate you coming on to give us the lowdown again. Mountain West fans, make sure you are following us here on the Big Mountain. Make sure FCS fans, you're following Sam Sam, can you just remind everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, I appreciate that. My Twitter account, at Sam Herder FCS. And then our website is Hero Sports, Hero Sports, where we cover FCS, but we also have a full-time writer who covers the Group of Five, and the Mountain West. And so we have plenty of content, not only on FCS, but also Group of Five, Group of Six football, whatever you want to call it. A little bit of mid-major basketball as well. So plenty of content up on herosports.com.
Hero Sports is great. I follow you guys all the time. You have some great stories, always putting out some really interesting content. Sam, thank you so much for joining me again here on the Big Mountain.
Yeah, I appreciate you as always for having me on.
With that, hey, we thank you guys for watching. Congrats to all of the North Dakota State Bison fans. You are headed to the FBS. Very exciting times. With that, hey, smash that like button on the way out. Subscribe if you're not already. Subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.